Okay.
No?
Alrighty, we are
Okay.
live. Thank you everyone for joining me for Represent at the Active Learning Sessions for Faculty. My name is Kat Claus and I'm the moderator for today's session. In this session, we will have 3 faculty members talk about their experiences with international exchange programs and answer any questions you might have. At any point during the panel, you can ask a question at the Q&A function or the chat. Our panelists today are Theon Gruber-Ford, a 2019 Fulbright awardee and program manager for the Honors and Scholar Development Program at Howard University. We also have joining us Michelle Height, who is the Director of International Fellowships and Scholarships at Spelman College. Last but not least, we have Als Gallop, who worked at UNC Chapel Hill as Program Assistant for Nationally Competitive and Prestigious Awards after she worked at North Carolina State University. So thank you all for joining me today. I will give you a quick moment to also introduce yourself. So please tell me your name, your pronouns, and any relevant information to this panel. Michelle, would you like to kick it off?
Sure, I can. Again, my name is Michelle Height. I'm happy to be here. She, her pronouns. I direct prestigious international fellowships at Spelman College, and mostly because I'm the honors program director. And so that responsibility was placed in my office the year that I took over.
Thank you very much for joining us again. Theon, would you like to be the next one to introduce yourself?
Of course. So my name is Theon Gruber-Ford, and I work at Howard University. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I have been working at Howard University in the Center for Honors and Scholar Development since the summer of 2017. So almost 4 years. And the majority of my work focuses on helping students to apply for a National Merit Award. So the recruitment process and then going through the application process, etc. So I am very happy to be here and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Happy to have you. And last but not least, Als.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Als Gallop, and I am currently the National Scholarships and Fellowships Coordinator at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, which is located in Greensboro, North Carolina. And in my role, I work with all candidates for nationally competitive fellowships, scholarships, internships. And so that means undergraduate students, grad students, and alums of both degree programs. I'm housed within the University Honors Program, so I also help with programming for our excellent students.
It sounds like we have a lot of great and differing backgrounds today. So I'm so excited to dig into this topic of how faculty and students and what can we do to help minority students in international programs. So my first question for all the panelists, and feel free to jump in, is your personal experience with international exchange programs and why you think they're important.
I can start. I mean, I actually didn't travel abroad while I was an undergraduate. And so I didn't take advantage of any of these awards. And mostly, I think it was because I didn't understand how I could pay for it. And I had a friend who was a Spanish major. And it was really interesting because she was so surprised when her major required a travel abroad experience and her parents helped fund it. And she was really nervous about asking her parents. And she was like equally enthusiastic and perplexed when they didn't understand why she thought it was a big deal that they would do it. And it wasn't that they were rich, but they thought that her study abroad was a part of what it meant to be an educated person, right? And so I think what that sort of taught me was that there were different ways of thinking about what constituted education beyond what happened in a particular classroom. And so, yeah, I mean, that this was an educational experience. And I think the vocabulary of the young people I knew who were first generation college and sort of didn't know how to frame it was thinking about what is study abroad as vacation. And so through the lens of a vacation, it seemed extravagant. right? But what her parents taught her and all of us as a result is that no, it was crucial and primary. And of course, they would support her in any way they could. So later at Spelman, Spelman Going Global became our QEP, our Quality Enhancement Plan. And I think it was important that a part of the messaging was, hey, did you know that your financial aid will help cover study abroad? Because when you are dealing with a population of first generation students, you do need to address some of the issues and concerns for that population. So I thought that that was an important, thoughtful consideration.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on that. I think, what I've learned since 2017 until now, working really directly with students at Howard University and promoting merit awards and promoting study abroad opportunities, is really that some students just don't know that there's funding out there, right? So they would love to go on these travel abroad experiences, even if it's for a summer or for a semester. But the concern sometimes is, and of course not for every student, but for some students, it is, how am I going to fund this? And I think, as Ms. Hype said, the hesitation to ask parents or to ask for help. So a big part of my work has been really kind of promoting the opportunities that do support students to apply for these awards, right? So like the Gilman in particular is a wonderful award that's funded by the State Department. And there's so many others. But I think once students realize that it is accessible and that the financial barrier can be overcome without putting, an unnecessary burden on their family, which I completely understand, but then it becomes more of, okay, I can do this. And I love to see that in my students, like, oh, wow, this is feasible. This is not a privilege. I can do this, and I can become more of a global citizen in the world. And that is particularly rewarding in and of itself.
Yes, I would like to piggyback off of what's been said by both my panelists, particularly that idea of privilege. I think either that is a privilege that must be earned, or that is a privilege based on finances, as far as whether you go abroad or not. And so I think that in my work now, that's something that I try to dispel. It's not really about privilege. It's about, are you interested in the opportunity? Do you know the opportunity exists? Do you know that funding for you to participate in the opportunity exists? And do you know why it is going to be valuable for you to invest in yourself by participating in the opportunity and be able to invest in others as a result of you participating? And so I'll go back a little bit. My first time going abroad was in an exchange program. It was a very small one, and it was connected to my internship from my graduate school program. And I actually had wanted to do study abroad in undergrad, but due to some timing in regards to national events, my parents were not really on board for that, and I didn't realize I had some agency outside of parental approval. But they thought it was important for me to go abroad and to have that experience. But I've definitely noticed through my peers and through my work now that everybody doesn't focus the conversation on what can they get out of an international experience and what can they give to others as a result. And I think that's really the value of international exchange, is that you are able to look past what you should be allowed to do versus what are you trying to accomplish and how can you best accomplish that goal. So if you were trying to enhance your communication skills, it might be useful to see how other people talk about ideas. If you were trying to develop scientific breakthroughs, it would be useful to see how other scientists have center their perspectives and their research. So I think it's valuable to kind of center that conversation on what are you trying to gain to help people, and how can you help people by doing international exchange. So it shouldn't be, are you going to do it? It's maybe when or why you do it.
Very insightful. Thank you. And I think there's a lot of common themes that you all mentioned about disparities and trying to strategically address those disparities. So the next question I think that'd be relevant to discuss would be, why do you think those disparities exist? So whether it's for BIPOC students, LGBTQ, students with disabilities, or other students who fall into a minority group, why are we seeing less students taking advantage of study abroad or international exchanges? And what can we do to combat some of that?
Well, I do think a lot of it has to do with, managing the world where you are situated. I mean, so if I think about my own experience and thinking about my friend, like I said, I mean, I was an undergraduate who thought about all the things. I thought that it was my responsibility to figure things out, right? So I couldn't figure out, if you have an apartment, you want to be an adult, you want to live off campus, how am I going to afford that apartment, the rent, for 3 months abroad? I didn't know about short study travel trips, right? And even then, I had been in college long enough to sort of understand that things cost money. And so that there are incidentals that you have to have money for. So I think there are students who in the United States are managing with their financial aid to take care of their debt and their needs, and they're sending money home. When I was in college, my now husband, he was Pell eligible. And so his family depended on some of that Pell money. And so we still hear those kinds of stories. I also think, and I was listening to some of these other We Represent students, talk, or panelists in other sessions talking about this. On one hand, there's this way in which, being a person of color, or, unbidden in some way, you sort of, in addition to thinking about your own, the costs that you bear, I also think, and it's similar to what Alsace was suggesting, I think we also think about what we cost other people, right? So there is this way in which sometimes my students with internships, they'll be talking about, like, the company will talk about all their assets. I think the unbidden person is thinking, well, if you hire me, might that impact your assets? So, for example, will this finance company lose money because the client doesn't want to work with someone who's Black, right? So what is this going to mean if I live with a host family in an environment where the people don't want me there? What is it going to mean for them? So I actually think it's it's a complex problem that, at the very same time that we're thinking about the benefits and the services, the kind, generally, students who want to go abroad, they do want to participate in global citizenship. Well, I mean, it's a world that is fraught by all kinds of biases that they understand that they're going to be entering into. And so I think, our programs should help manage that in some way.
And I definitely agree. I definitely agree. I find that in my own experience, it is helping students to realize that with disabilities, with other, perceived, let's just say, impediments, right? That's not the correct word, but just let's go with that. That these opportunities accommodate for that, particularly with disabilities. There are opportunities out there that still allow you to study abroad while taking into consideration, like, you have that tick box where you can say, I have a disability and I need accommodations for that. And so having a disability should not ever make you feel like you're precluded from taking advantages of these opportunities that are going to help you to grow as a person and to increase and enhance your global perspective, right? And sometimes those conversations, happen, I don't know, teacher to students. Sometimes it happenstance, but that's why we also have our office, because that's why we are there. to ensure that our students understand the level of access that is available to them, and that sometimes the internalized limitations are simply just that. They're not actually actual limitations, that we can actually overcome this, and that we can move on to receiving many of the same opportunities to grow and to develop and to see the world and to grow as global citizens, just like everyone else, right? And I think that's one of the most rewarding aspects of my life when I, in terms of my work, when I do see like this light bulb go on, and the kids are like, really? This is out there? Like, they will allow for disabilities, and I can still do this if I have a disability. It's like, absolutely, yes. Yes, you can. Let's work on this application. And so I would say to that, a lot of it has to do with just making that connection with the students one-on-one, and really having those heart-to-hearts where you're able to move them from this place of maybe false perceptions of what is accessible to them, and then to the actuality, right? So enlightening them, for lack of a better phrase, in terms of knowing, no, this does not preclude you from doing this. You can do this, and you can make this happen, and you can continue on your own personal and professional journey in your own, growth as an individual. And let's not forget, like when we're talking about the global market, when we're talking about job opportunities, having that study abroad experience, it's almost priceless on your resume, right? Because it talks about, it speaks to your ability to adapt to different cultures. And then so many organizations and so many companies are looking for that. So for me, one of the most rewarding aspects is just helping my students realize that some of these perceived limitations, and not that they aren't in a way actual, but let's differentiate between the actual and the perceived, and the fact that there are opportunities out there that recognize that there are some students that will need additional help in order to reach their full potential and their full goal, and let's take advantage of those, right? And I find that that's a big part of my job, and I accept that wholeheartedly.
Yes, I would say, as far as what I try to make sure students know about these opportunities, or applicants, I should say, is that they're available to you based on what you want. So I really try to center my advising appointments, coaching appointments, on what do you want. And I have a marketing perspective from some of my coursework. So I know a lot of times you have to repeat messages multiple times, and that's also very well known by us as those working in higher education. When sharing concepts, it's not something that's heard one time and just automatically adapted, especially as my colleagues have mentioned. Sometimes there might be reinforced ideas about access that the applicant has brought to you before you've even interacted with them. And so it takes time to really uncover what kind of misconceptions the applicant might have as far as access, in addition to the unfamiliarity with the program in question, which is our level of expertise as advisors. But really saying, okay, well, what is it you want to do? Why do you want to do it? Are you doing something towards that? Why not? How can I be a help? And a lot of times in those probing questions, I get to hear what some of those misconceptions are about either the program or in general is exchange for me. Am I wanted in this space? Am I going to be accommodated in this space? And how does this tie into my goals? And is it going to be worth it? Is this going to cause harm, or is this going to really be a benefit? And so really trying to assess where my applicant is coming from is really important, and gives me an opportunity to hopefully dispel a lot of notions. And then that a lot of times I notice that gives me a great opportunity to introduce them to this idea that the world as it is not the world as it can be and will be. They get to have agency in shaping the world as it should be. So don't look at years of past recipients and say, those are the people who go. I'm not shown in there in a way I recognize, so therefore I'm not supposed to go. No, that's just what has been. But you get to decide what you want for yourself, and hopefully also encourage other people who might have your shared experience. So those are the perspectives I try to take when underlining the importance of pursuing international opportunities, but also helping to help the applicant navigate any real or perceived disparities so that they can be centered and take advantage of the opportunity for them as an individual.
Thank you. Yeah, as a queer disabled woman, I had a lot of perceptions, just as a side note, that prevented me from doing a study abroad program. I did one in Canada, which is great, but there's also another one in Poland, and I had my own preconceived, notions that told me that I couldn't even apply. And so to this day, that's one of my biggest regrets, is not doing a program because I had all of those misconceptions. And that was something, Theon, you addressed a lot, and you as well, Alsace, and Michelle, if you want to give input. Would you mind sharing some of those misconceptions, preconceived notions, or other things that applicants bring to you when they first see you, so other faculty administrators can be aware of what's going on in the background before they ever make contact first?
I mean, I will say in my experience, a lot has been about affordability. How am I going to essentially, to be a little colloquial, how am I going to swing this without going to my parents, without having to put additional burden on them because they're already helping me to get through private school. Howard is a private institution, as well as, an HBCU. So the concern that I often get is just not wanting to put additional burden on their parents. And so financial matters are certainly a thing. I think it's very interesting in terms of disability and I think, how do I phrase it? The concern of will I fit in? Is this a space for the privileged? Is a little bit more latent. And you have to have conversations with students to kind of realize that underneath it all, there's this concern that maybe this isn't for me. Maybe this is just for the privileged, because what we see on television, what we see in entertainment, what we are fed by so many things is that, well, study abroad opportunities are for a wealthier sector of society. So I think, in a sense, you almost have to play psychologist, like a partial psychologist, to kind of like dismantle that, and then just being very, very clear and honest with the facts. Like I always walk with this like list of opportunities and what the opportunities are for, what the merit awards are for. It's kind of like it's a table, and what they fund, etc. And so once I start to show these students what's really out there for them, and I'm talking students with 3.5 GPAs and above who doubt that they even deserve merit awards, right? Or even 3.0 who worry that they will never get a Fulbright. Once you start to show them, no, you really have a misconception. These award opportunities are for you, right? Like, you just need to submit this application. And if you don't submit the application, you never know if you're going to get it. So let's just work on submitting the application part, right? I think that for me is kind of that line. It's kind of that bridge. Once you get them over that bridge, then you're really working. And there's so many students. Like, I mean, I cannot even name how many students, or give you a number for how many students who came into my office just really thinking that these opportunities weren't for them, and they ended up receiving them. And their lives have continued to excel and grow to a level that it even surprises them, right? So I think as staff members and faculty, you can see the potential within them, but then it's helping them see the potential within themselves, and also letting them know that all of these concerns about accommodation, financial, and if you have a disability, etc., they are accounted for a lot of these opportunities that are outside there, right? And many of them just don't know that, and they're so concerned about putting additional burden on their parents And it's letting them know, no, we we can work on just your merit alone, right? Like how involved you've been as a person, how active you've been in the community, how strong your GPA is. I mean, just letting them know that them in and of themselves, they have developed such a structure that is good enough and more than good enough to be rewarding of these opportunities. I think that is once you pass that line, once you get them to understand that, and you help them through the process of putting in that application, and also stating, I think very very clearly that it's not always about winning or losing. I'm very clear about that. So it's, you won't win if you don't try. So let's just try, right? Let's develop that confidence, and let's just put it out there. I think once we get to that point, then doors start to open. And when one door starts to open, you realize down the line, as I follow my alumni, so many other doors start to open, right? So that is what I would say.
Yes, I would echo a lot of what Theon has said. And I would say one thing that keeps candidates from participating is that they are trying to do everything on their own. So much so that they don't even sometimes articulate that they have an interest in going abroad to anyone, because they're trying to figure out how they would make it work, as Michelle and Theon have said, you know, especially financially, but just other logistics. So how will I fund this? How will I stay on track academically? Where will I live? What are the plane flights like? I've never been abroad before. Will I be with a cohort? You know, there's all these questions that they may have thought of before, they may not have, but just the sheer volume of questions or the intensity of even one question can oftentimes encourage applicants to try to figure it out on their own first before they broach the idea. I have found particularly with students who have either demonstrated financial need, they're the first in their family to go to college. They might also be first generation American. They might attend an HBCU. Any or all of those commonalities is that it's particularly intensified. And also if they maybe have been at a career field earlier, that encourages independence. So for example, our military students or our veteran students, there's a strong either instilled sense of a need for independence, and that there's merit associated with that independence, or that might have been their life experience so far. Maybe they would have appreciated some support, but due to various circumstances, there was a scarcity of the support that they might have really benefited from. And so a lot of times you don't even know that they're interested if you're waiting for them to come talk to you. And I think a lot of times the students who would be great for these international opportunities that we're trying to reach out to and encourage, and that a lot of programs are catered towards or focusing towards, you know, that's where the disconnect is, because these applicants might not even come to you because they think they have to figure it out first. They don't know that there's a Dr. Height and a Professor before and a Ms. Gallop here, that's our job, is to help them with those details and navigate. And so I think what I would tell my fellow faculty and staff listening is that you are not going to over encourage an applicant, because you might actually be the first person who's encouraged them, and they might have that seed of wanting to go inside of them, but they haven't told anybody because they're afraid that will actually keep them from getting the opportunity, because they'll be exposed for not knowing this information ahead of time. And so I think that is that self-sufficiency is a double-edged sword. It can hurt them in the beginning if they don't realize that they're not supposed to know everything. But then when they get selected, it can be a great asset for helping them be even more flexible and open to the new experiences that they're going to have. So that's one thing I would encourage, is to be aware of that there are some students who are fantastic candidates, but they don't know that. Like Theon was saying, they don't know that they have all these great characteristics. And then, as Michelle said earlier, they're trying to figure out the logistics. They're trying to figure out all these other answers and questions. and they're not asking anybody for help because they don't realize that people who are seen as privileged in the past, that is normal to ask for help and to have a support system. So that's what I would really encourage, is that to build that support system and make it a great thing to ask for help, and to educate candidates that you are supposed to ask for help. We value your questions, not that we're going to assess you and to filter you out based on what you know, because a lot of times people already have that misconception in their head to begin with.
I appreciate being able to build off of Theon and Alsace's comments, because I think that what students fundamentally misunderstand has so much to do with the undergraduate space and that transition from being in a world where education demanded that you get the right answers to one that really is asking them to have the right questions. And that is a transition that you have to support. And in that vein, one of the greatest misconceptions that they have is what a competition involves. So what students really don't understand about this space is that we exist. The offices, the support exists because the foundations actually want to give away the money. They want to support the experience. This is not something that people want you to be kept from. So the benefit, to Alsace's point about these structures of support that exist, is that even if the student doesn't get the fellowship, the experience of pursuing it in and of itself is one that helps them and stretches them in ways that, support a narrative of winning. You've won if you can speak more eloquently about your ambitions for who you want to be and what you want to see in the world. So the process in and of itself is built for your flourishing. And it's hard for students to understand that when you're saying, hey, this is competitive and it's prestigious, but it's for me. How does that quite work? So I think it benefits the student if, as Alsace was saying, we we make all of this apparent to them. These things that we take for granted about why this is an important process. If the value is going through it in and of itself, then make that plain to students, right? Make that a part of their journey, that you remove the stuff that makes the stage look pretty, and you give them a look backstage to see what this is all intended for. So I tell them, like, I'm actually not even connected to whether or not they win. That's just a bonus. If they can come out of this saying that it was a good, positive, academic, intellectual, fulfilling experience, then I've done my job.
Yeah, and I really wanted to add it to that, just to say that is, I completely understand and support that, because a big part of what we try to emphasize in our office is the fact that it's not about winning. Like, you grow so much from the process of even putting forth yourself to apply for these awards and to work with our office to apply for these awards. And I'm sure it's the same with both of you, but we've had so many students who've been semifinalists or non-awardees for prestigious merit awards, who go on to get full scholarships at great universities, right? I mean, I can't even count how many that happens for. And I think part of it is really just the practical aspect of it, learning and practicing how to tell your story, your narrative, your experiences, etc. So when I say all of this, I mean, it is a win-win, right? The belief in yourself to put forward that application, whether you win or you so-called win or you lose, in the end, you kind of win anyway, because you really are, you're forced to kind of create in your mind this cohesion of what your narrative is, and then to take it from your mind and put it on paper. And then you have the support of our office to help you do that. And so whatever steps you take moving forward, you have that background, you have that experience, and that is only going to be an asset for you. So I really do try to to emphasize that to my students. And I think that in terms of the statistics, I can see how that has certainly been the case. Like the merit awards are hard to get sometimes, but so many of them have moved on to still excellent opportunities. So then the question is, merit awards are excellent, of course, but this is helping you on your journey to becoming your best self. And that's what I am here to help you to do.
Yes, and if I may, when I came to A&T, or North Carolina A&T for the public, I decided I really wanted to make exploration a key goal for my candidates. And so I have that as part of my hashtag for my unit's Twitter account, and I use that in the messaging. It's not for me, if you get selected, as Michelle and Theon have said, is did you articulate that that was something you wanted? And did you try to get more information about that? And so that's something else I try to share with my colleagues at my institution, but also I would encourage those listening to think about the two, particularly if you are in the fellowship and scholarship advising spaces, we three are. There's also sometimes national, there's this also conversation amongst institutions of how many recipients do we have of this opportunity. So it looks great to get something, of course. And what I like to impart in the messaging is it's also important to see how many people pursue this opportunity, how many people knew about it. Is it part of the campus culture? And then to also give status to those who have gotten some type of national recognition. Everybody is not going to be selected. I jokingly often say sometimes, if you want to apply for XYZ, whatever, I won't call out a particular scholarship or fellowship, but chances are you're not going to get it. So let's get that out of the way. Now, why would you want to do it? And, that as Theon talked about a lot in this last point, articulating that you do want it, validating your desire, especially for undergraduate students, I think is unfamiliar. And as Michelle was saying, transitioning to that space of asking the right questions, they have not asked themselves, why should I do something just for me versus it looks good, or people said I should do it, or I'm an honor student, so I should do it. But what do you want out of it? And then helping the institution see the value that our candidates are getting just by entering that space of self-reflection and articulation, and what that says about the richness of resources from our institution, but really validating that search and that exploration, I think is so important, not just for the candidates, but for faculty and staff administrators to really foster that. And so that's the other thing I would just like to add for that.
No, thank you for that wonderful point. And Michelle, I loved the metaphor for saying, see behind the curtain and all of that. I think that is so true for what youth need as an educator myself. And I'll say, so you mentioned something a little bit about your marketing, of course, and how you tell other faculty to market it. Could you please expand a little bit about why marketing is important and any tips and tricks you have to help with those perceptions and help those students, demographics group, feel comfortable reaching out to you and consider being applicants?
Sure, thank you. So I tend to think of marketing a little differently than I think general audiences think of it. So a lot of times people hear marketing, they think advertising. So flyers, promotional emails, social media. And I tend to look at it more from the marketing research. So who is a good fit? Who is eligible for these programs? Who has been applying for these programs? And how have they been doing in those cycles, but also who's not applying, who is eligible, and then really digging into the why of that. So at my first institution, that's actually how I started my outreach, because I noticed there was a disparity between who was eligible to apply for national scholarships and fellowships and who was actually applying. It didn't reflect the student population. I didn't know why. It was my first time being in the fellowship advising space. And I joined at the height of application season. So I was trying to absorb as much information as I could. And so I think really asking a lot of questions is an important way to go about marketing, really understanding who is eligible, who is applying, why or why not, what messages are out there. Are those messages clear? and effective? Are they messages that have just been recycled? What's the campus culture? Is there a perceptible campus culture? Is it encouraging people to seek opportunities or not? So I think it starts when you're doing marketing to really just start asking a lot of questions. Just so in that way, I really think of marketing from a research perspective of just being inquisitive and observant, and then really trying to understand, okay, where is the overlap between what my candidates want and what they're skilled at and what these scholarships are offering. So if I have a lot of people who are interested in working in the federal government, I should be talking to them about the scholarships and fellowships that are looking for people who want careers in the federal government, and then really trying to identify faculty and staff and administrators who can be partners, and especially in my current institution, but I would say really generally in the advising space for these scholarships and fellowships. A lot of times we're operating as a unit of one, maybe two, maybe full time on the focus, maybe not. And so I think it's really important to amplify your message through other people. So that's the second point I would say is don't let yourself be the only person sharing the message, because you can't. As much as you might want to, you won't be reaching all the people you could be, and you'll be exhausted as a result of trying to. And I think I forgot if it was Theon or Michelle mentioning this, but I think it's important for candidates to hear the message from different people. That helps them hear it better. And I'll speak from my personal experience. My mother was an educator, and she told me about Rhodes and Fulbright, but I only heard it from my mom. And my mom, was, I would say, pretty much never wrong. But she was my mom. So sometimes I heard what she said. Sometimes I didn't quite hear what she said. And so, so I came to college knowing about these opportunities, but it was in the context of, oh, this is just something my mom said I should do, but she thinks I can do everything, which is a great thing to have a mother think of you, but it's not necessarily a motivating factor at certain points in a student's life. And so really telling professors like, hey, let me invite you to a Fulbright session so you know what it's about, so you can mention it to students who will be so honored that you even are reaching out to them, much less telling them to apply for a national award. And so I think those are probably the first two steps I would encourage everybody to take, is to ask a lot of questions about what's already happening, and then figure out who can help you amplify the message. Because if you're not amplifying the message, you'll be exhausted, and you probably still won't reach everybody that you're trying to actually reach. So I'll pause there and let my colleagues jump in.
I think it's interesting. I mean, that to hear, to be on this panel, first of all, with Alsace and Theon, because they're both at universities and I'm at a college. And, in generally, like in the field, the distinctions, people kind of in some ways take them for granted, but it's hard for me to take it for granted because, of course, my own experience was always at the university level. So there were always graduates around, and you take classes with graduate students who can show what I like to call intellectual sovereignty. How you just sort of do things because you're curious without the professor telling you. So you kind of learn this lifestyle. So when I became the honors program director, I thought, well, okay, here's my opportunity to kind of, as the director, act like the grad student would in that environment. So it's a gamified structure. So applying for me within that structure gets you points, right? But I'm also at an institution that made their QEP, the Quality Enhancement Plan, Spelman going global. And so everyone needed to understand that your job is to promote study abroad, right? And one of our students is currently a Fulbright ambassador. And so she came through during this COVID year to my workshop. And one of the things she said to the students was that when she started at Spelman, the QEP was Spelman Going Global. And she said, as a first generation college student whose parents did not understand my desires as an international studies major. They didn't understand how any of that was going to work, how we were going to afford it. I was going to be there alone. They couldn't come and save me or help me financially if something went wrong. She said what that QEP did was it validated my interests, and it made it so that my entire institution supported me, right? Listen, that story in and of itself was good marketing. So, I mean, there are many ways I think that you can mobilize the diversity that both Theon and Alsace were talking about in terms of getting students involved. So, you have those who can tell that kind of story. We have poll banners of students who've won the awards. That's a big deal. People want to be on that banner. And the current thing that I've been doing is, we've never won a Rhodes, like lots of places haven't. But the fact that we are next door to Morehouse, which has won 5, and they're sort of, considered our brother school, well, then, okay, there's another way of getting at the competition. They've got 5. Look at this link. Check out what these students around the world have done. And let's see what we can do to build you up so that you might, be like them in some ways. And again, even if they don't win, I think we all benefit from their efforts, to use these other recipients as a model.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of great points about how to do with marketing. And it's also just a holistic messaging is the really common thread that I'm seeing here. It's hashtags are nice, but it's not just one outreach. It really needs to be entrenched in the institution, making these opportunities available. But I want to come back to another thing that you said, Alsace. Sorry to keep picking on you. You were talking a little bit, and I think, Theon, you mentioned a little bit too about data, about noticing differences in students who were applying. What kind of data should faculty and institutions be keeping? Where is the first step if they're not keeping data? And what are some best practices to be able to examine how your program is doing and if it's meeting its goals?
Yes, so I think the data depends on being realistic, from speaking from a realistic perception or perspective, to look at first what your institution is going to want to know. And so maybe looking at what type of data your institution gathers about their students or their alums is a great starting place. I would say the next place is looking at the eligibility and selection criteria for different scholarships, and looking for overlap, or just, depends on how much time you have or how much assistance you have, but trying to categorize that and then just go through past files. What I've started doing, or not started, but what I tend to tweak it each year is when students are applying, particularly I'll say students, undergraduate students, are applying for a program, particularly if it requires an institutional selection process, is that I build in a survey to try to capture some of that information. So, and I give them the definition of what a first generation college student is, but as an example, because a lot of students would not categorize themselves that way. Same thing with Pell Grant eligibility, what it means to have studied abroad or to go abroad. I am really specific about that, but I try to collect that as they're applying for something. Sometimes in my advising appointments, when they book an appointment, I'll ask them, what are your goals and interests? What do you know so far? What are you hoping to learn? So I like to, so I'm switching a little bit about the types of data, but also just even more broadly, quantitative versus qualitative data. I think is really important to capture qualitative data, because if we're really emphasizing the point that there is some type of growth in the candidate, I think a lot of times qualitative data is where we see that and where we can make that case as staff or faculty advisors to the administration, but also to other candidates. So in some of the poll banners Michelle was mentioning, another example is some institutions will have spaces in really public areas of their campus where they have posters of candidates or some types of plaques. And so you can tell stories that way, and you can pull quotes. I've started doing that on some of my social media posts. So that can be used for both marketing, but also for data, and really saying this is what the candidate is reporting that they have learned. And so we don't necessarily have to create a metric if that's not your wheelhouse, or if you don't have that capability. But those are some starting places where I look for the data, of course, the basic demographic information, but really, what did you know about this opportunity beforehand? What are you hoping to get out of it? What are your goals and interests? And really try to use that. I try to gather data. I guess I'll sum it up this way. I try to gather data that helps me see if candidates are matching up well with the opportunities, but also that can serve multiple purposes. So it can help to encourage more candidates. It can help make the case for administrators to have XYZ on campus, and just kind of keep a record of our institution's growth as far as the culture evolving. That's something I'm really interested in doing in my current institution, is really fostering the culture of fellowship, fellowship seeking them. Basically what Michelle was saying is having it as a QEP, but just so people who have, for whatever reason, they have fully examined going abroad, they never want to go, but they know about it, they can tell their friends, and they know the value of going abroad. It's just not a fit for what they want to do at the time. So that's some of the data I look at, but I try to look at that from a quantitative and qualitative perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in my case, go ahead, Theon.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say that for us in our office, we're very data heavy. And so initially, or essentially, I was going to ask Kat what kind of data you were really referring to. But I think I'll say that it starts from the very, very beginning, right? So we work with our registrar's office in terms of pulling students who meet certain criteria for different awards. And then we start to email them. And then we keep a database of all the students that have applied. And then we certainly note whether they've been semifinalists, recipients, etc. And we keep them in, again, this Excel kind of like spreadsheet database that we continually need to refer to and use. A big thing that we also do is figure out what they are doing next. So again, as I said before, there's so many students who've been semifinalists or not, or recipients that went on to win major awards. I mean, when I say major, big awards, big scholarships. And so we have that in our database as well, so that we can just track their progress, right? So what has the opportunity of working with our office for some of these awards, how did that help you in your journey to becoming this greater self that you are now, right? So in terms of our institution, definitely data heavy for all our recipients. We're big on publicity, and those what would I say? Those kind of like release. There's publicity release forms and data that we put on our website to highlight the progress of our students. We also have the banners throughout campus. All that to say, I think that tracking the progress of applicants, semifinalists, recipients is very, very important. And we also see ourselves as going beyond just the data sphere. It's great to have data, but we're big on also keeping relationships with our students, because once you're working with them one-on-one, you inevitably build relationships, right? So yes, we're big on publicizing. We love that. We enjoy highlighting the great work that our students do and keeping track of their entire progress and making sure that our recruitment is quite targeted. But then on top of that, I think it's also ensuring that connections are made, and having that data helps you to maintain connections over the years. Some of our students also, or alumni rather, participate in a lot of our information sessions. And so they talk to our students about what the application process was like for them. They give tips and advice. They serve as mentors. We have an ebook with blogs from past recipients that speak to their experiences. Now we actually have a blog that hosts or past recipients, and they talk about their experiences. So we really try to have an archive of that. And what I think the most important thing is, outside of the benefits for the alumni, or students see students that they know, like in their classroom, that are doing as good as them or near, or like they can identify with, and they're like, gosh, this person did this, I can do this too, right? And so when you see those press releases, when you see the blogs, when you see the Twitter, where they're on the information sessions talking to you, there's this moment when there's this identification that I think is priceless. Because when you see that person who looks like you and you can identify with, there's almost nothing you can say to a student that kind of will replicate what they're going to internally feel when they see someone who has gone through a journey similar to them, or who they know, and they're like, oh wow, that person did it, I can reach out to them, I can do that too, right? So that is what I will add there.
I think when you listen to both Theon and Alsace, you really hear this really well-coordinated, thoughtful, holistic sort of way of capturing data. I think it's important that folk understand that there are other ways to do it, right? So like at Spelman, we don't have a single fellowship office. And so if, listening to the two of them, I'm thinking, right, there's no way in the world, and this is something that I've, expressed to our senior administration, like, this is a huge job. So like when you put it in an honors program without a staff, there's no way that I'm going to be able to do what they just described, teach, and then have a program with 300 students in it. You just can't do it. So I actually administer prestigious international fellowships. So even getting kids to understand that, right, the CLS and Boren and Gilman, they feed Fulbright and Wrangell and Pickering and Payne, but you have to go somewhere else for that, right? Because I can't manage those. Just literally, just in terms of the volume, the work that is required. So some of those are done in our international studies office. Some are done in study abroad. And then our domestic fellowships, that comes out of the dean's office. So we don't have a singularly coordinated space for institutional data, right? Or even a single kind of way of thinking about it. Just when the different offices, because we all get along wonderfully, when we decided, okay, we have to meet as a committee so that we could tell a single story, especially, this was really more related to pass fail with COVID. What is the institutional narrative that we're telling, and how is that going to impact these fellowships, right? Well, COVID happened. And so, we were so busy creating everything else, we didn't sort of get back to that particular story. So until then, to the point that Alsace was making about qualitative data, I'm more interested in capturing that stuff, because to me, that's what matters most. It is what the student says about her journey, how she grew and expanded. And so that is actually literally what I capture. Everything else, the demographic stuff, what they applied for, that's all. I created a Moodle course, and this was before. So at the time, Moodle was our LMS and our learning management system prior to COVID. And so that keeps the records of who applied, when, how many times they came to the workshop and all of that. But I am more interested in sort of what they say about their own growth. So my own sort of notes corresponds to that.
No, thank you for those very different perspectives. I think that it was, I'm sorry, go ahead, Alsace. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, just really quickly, I'm so appreciative of what Michelle said, because I think in reality, I rely more on the qualitative data because I'm not even an office. I'm a person with a program that is understaffed, and we do so many things. And I think that's very characteristic of a lot of HBCUs is that we are doing, each person's doing 2 or 3 persons work. And so a lot of the data I have is not analyzed if I have it, but some of the data is what I either have collected or would like to collect. But I think that's an important note to make that, I think a lot of those of us who are advisors in particular, you will probably be understaffed, and to rely on qualitative data, and it's not, I think sometimes people see it as a lesson because it's not a number. Like we have X number of Gilman scholars or Fulbrights or whatever, but it's what is oftentimes more persuasive, and it's accessible and it's functional. And then if I may just put in a brief plug, for those of you who don't know about some resources for advisors, there's an organization called the National Association of Fellowships Advisors that can be a great resource as well to try to amplify your to try to duplicate yourself as an advisor, as it were. But I think what Michelle said is spot on.
NAFA is wonderful. Yeah, NAFA is a wonderful organization. And I mean, people are generous. And this idea about, stressing the growth of the student as, an educational experience is something that I learned early from them. And again, seeing a different model of competition, sharing resources with people whose students are also competing for the same awards. This is not sports competition, right? I mean, this is a different sort of way of being in community. So I highly recommend that fellowship advisors participate and that the institutions fund it.
No, thank you, Alsace. You kind of introduced the next 2 questions that I was going to touch on, which were what resources are out there. So we've already started a wonderful chat about those, and I will make sure that those links are copied into the chat for all attendees to see. So my second question, the next one that I was going to go to, is what challenges or benefits do HBCUs have who are doing this work? Or if they're not doing this work, why should HBCUs particularly pay attention to international abroad programs, or the study abroad, or any of the fellowships mentioned?
Well, I'll just start off by saying that I think it's important to have diversity and representation. I think it's also very important to instill in our students that these are opportunities that are also very much out there for them, and that is just a fact. But sometimes it's something that we have to help them to internalize. And so HBCUs participating in this, and of course they're one of the minority serving institutions. That means that the more work we do on this, the more we're students that are out there representing individuals that look like them and have experiences like them. And I think, long term, when we think about the global sphere market, job markets, etc., having more of our students within those spheres who have these, who are more competitive for those opportunities, right? Because they have that international experience, who have grown personally and individually, and who then take on these positions. I think it's kind of like a trickle down effect, right? So you start off with helping them to realize, oh, this is for you, and this is going to be great, and we're going to get this done. And then little by little, you see them more in certain spheres, some certain occupational spheres, and then there's naturally more representation and diversity. And I think that's priceless.
She covered it for me. I think that's it. I mean, I agree. I totally believe in the kind of diversity too that we've cultivated at HBCUs, because the thing that we know is that we're not just teaching one Black kid. I mean, there's diversity within Black experience, right? And nurturing the students to be who they are in the way that we have even further expands representations of Blackness globally, right? I mean, so I think we make that contribution. I've been thinking a lot about the Gwendolyn Brooks novel, the only one that she wrote, Maud Martha. And there's a moment when this poor working woman says of herself, what am I to do with all this life, right? And the way that she understood herself as having abundance, despite the way the world constructed that, makes a significant contribution, right? Like, what kind of abundance is that? How do you get there? And this is the same woman who in this novel says about herself, I only wanted to donate to the world a good Maud Martha, right? So of course, someone who would find abundance in their life on their own terms would think they have something to give. We want that kind of person as a representative of who we are as Americans, as human beings. And so if we believe in our mission to teach all who come, then I think we want to donate that back to the world.
No, thank you. It's very evident from all of your talks today that all of our panelists here care very much about their work, and it all seems like a heavy lift. So my next question for all of you to touch upon is what can other faculty do who might have multiple departments they're in charge of or multiple programs? How do you prioritize doing work that never seems to get done, especially in a space where it's so important for representation? It's so important to help these students. How do you make those decisions? And if you could wave a magic wand and fix everything, what new, tools would you have? What new resources would be important for your work?
I can start. I don't know if Alsace is having some tech glitches. And so I can build on the last thing she said as a contribution about being under-resourced, right? I mean, so generally, I pretty much do everything but groundskeeping. I mean, if it needs to get done, then the attitude is you do it, right? And I actually like that. I like working in that way. I like having the freedom and the flexibility to be engaged in every aspect of my job and not sort of just thinking about how it looks from, or I am a professor, right? I think I like the idea of giving where, how I can fully. But having said that, you need help because it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work to do this. And even with fellowships just being in the honors program, the international ones, still everyone is due in the fall, right? I mean, so, it is a lot of work to read. So, certainly, ideally, it would be wonderful to have other people who could help. So hiring more people would be helpful. But in lieu of that, right, especially, post-COVID, how many people can afford to hire more people? So one of the things that I proposed to the English department, where that's my home department, we often have classes that don't make for one reason or the other. So I proposed to our chair that if the creative writers classes didn't make, I wanted them to come help me with fellowships. Because what is crucial, the primary thing that you want these students to be able to end the fellowship experience with is a greater understanding of how you can tell a story, especially stories from people who represent the unbidden, because the overarching narrative of who you are has to be written against. But you also don't want to think that that's the only story that you can tell, the one where you resist that, right? So what narratives of your fullness can you tell? So I was interested in working with the the creative writers to work on the storytelling. And so actually, we have a marshal who is going to be doing some storytelling workshops this summer for students. But that led to the provost saying, hey, if we do that across campus with other departments whose classes don't make, we could have faculty available across campus who could help with interviews and the statements. And I thought, yeah, that could work, especially if her office coordinates it. If I have to, then that's one more thing I have to do. So just sort of recognizing that an all hands on deck approach could be useful, and it all benefits the students, could be a way of dealing with these issues when you don't have money.
Very insightful and innovative idea. Thank you very much. Theon and Alsace, do you have anything to share about how you manage, such a large workload with many different areas at your institutions?
I can read Alsace. She says, I would embed support for applicants before they become applicants, and I would reduce or shift the onus of learning about programs from candidates to campus units. For example, I would tell students that their first semester that they can go abroad, their second semester if they want, and I would tell them this information during orientation and first year seminars. That's exactly it. You have to start the minute those kids hit the ground. And now I've started doing it. And this is why I think fellowships are in honors, because of the applicants that I see, right? So I'm literally looking at applicants thinking, does this girl have grit? Right? Do you see the resilience even in the way she tells her stories? But yes, and during COVID, because we're all sort of trained on Zoom, you literally can start now. You could reach out to your honors population which I did during orientation. Drop links. Do you know about this? When I was looking at your applications, these are the kinds of things I was thinking about. So you can start there. And yes, hopefully we'll have our first year experience course where we can make that training a part of the very first year of their experience so that they can build those profiles.
Yeah, I certainly agree with all of that. I'll say that for our office and our work at Howard, we start as soon as the freshman students get on campus. So when we have our open day, we start introducing them to our office, and then we kind of leave them for that first year to kind of get their great GPAs, right? But they know about us, and they know that we have an open office policy. And then starting sophomore year and junior year, we have information sessions that are targeted to them. And we have information sessions straight through the spring, throughout the summer, and then summer workshops. So everything is kind of like timelined and very, very scheduled based on the award opportunities that are coming up. We also work with targeted groups. We work with faculty members. Faculty members, of course, as I know everybody knows, are priceless because they know those students so well because they're seeing them in the classrooms, etc. In terms of a recruitment list, working with the registrar's office, etc. So, I think having that cyclical cycle over these couple of years has really been important for us because we know exactly what we're doing next. And when you know exactly what you're doing next, there's a streamlined approach in terms of approaching each new group of students, or students rather.
I think we would all agree with that, Theon, and we know that you guys have got that covered over there. Shout out to Lily. Alsace says too in the chat, to your point, Theon, about like the cycle and faculty, if I could wave a magic wand to increase representation among applicants in international exchange, I would reward faculty and staff for spreading the word and for serving on campus and national selection panels. And to that point, like I did, and I don't know if I came up with this or if I learned it from someone in NAFA, but while we were on campus, I gave, like cards to get lunch or whatever, like little gift cards for people who helped with that process. And also, during COVID, I was on a committee for UNCF Mellon, and the person who directs that program said, well, normally we would have had a big banquet, but in lieu of that, she sent us all $20 Grubhub gift certificates. Yeah, and I thought that was nice. So it doesn't have to be that you give someone a course release, right? It might just be, some little gift card to the cafeteria. Grubhub during COVID was great. So it can be something small and manageable, right?
No, thank you, Michelle, and thank you again for reading Alsace. Just like, we like to model for our students, we're modeling flexibility here with our technical issues at a virtual conference, as I'm sure we are all used to after COVID. But Michelle, you brought up a wonderful point about partnering with other faculty and creating the buy-in. So how do you start those conversations, or how would you start them at an institution where there aren't those relationships to say, oh, you're in the English department or you're in the science department, please talk to your students about this. If you know a student who mentions, wanting to do an abroad experience, how do you create that buy-in? How do you create that structure across your entire institution?
Yeah, I think some of it involves taking advantage of the so-called problems that come up. Because oftentimes, faculty have conversation with other faculty because something didn't work. Right. Well, things not working, that can become an opportunity to make them work. Right. So, when things don't, sometimes it's a problem of, just a miscommunication. So in this instance, I'm thinking about how at Spelman, if most of the students are going to be advised in the Gen Ed core, so it doesn't quite matter who the advisor is for your major, because most of the students are taking classes in the core. By the spring, we encourage them to go meet with your major advisor because you're going to start working on major classes at this point. Well, I had a colleague in international studies who just did not understand how, as the honors director, I was attached to a student who was his. So he sort of said, well, look, I guess this doesn't have anything to do with me. So I reached out to him and explained, look, like even if, okay, in the fall, I can manage this. By the spring, when that student starts to ask questions about your major in international studies, I don't know what the professional organizations are. I don't know what other opportunities might exist beyond these fellowships, but I know that you have some role to play in that, right? So you have to carry that. I only know how the English major works, but the international space is where we both work together. And I've been thinking about, ways that we can even formalize that. Would you be interested? And then he said to me, oh, that would be great, right? Because he does CLS. So what started as a problem became an opportunity to think about how we could build a relationship together. And so I do think that that would be helpful. I mean, to make sure that any problem becomes an opportunity and how you think about what your needs are. Because if we agree that needs are everywhere, then problems will bring you close to other people. And in being brought close, you actually might build something that works for all of you together, so that potential conflict can actually be a place for repair and community.
Yeah, and I'll just hop in to say that, I think when our office started a couple years ago, we did a lot of information sessions that we invited faculty members to. And however, I think one approach that I realized in some of my merit awards that I work with, especially the STEM merit awards that require a lot of involvement from the faculty, is seeing the faculty members that are super involved, right? The ones that are reaching out to you to help your student. And so now I have this like niche of faculty members that I know I can kind of like call on because I can sense their sense of investment in the process. And so that's wonderful because you get to build one-on-one relationships around particular awards, and it builds a bit of a support network. So we're all kind of in this together for the students. So that has been one great thing, and I agree with Michelle that giving an award to the faculty, that's something that we started recently. So we have kind of this recognition award for a faculty member that has been integral in terms of like really working with our office. And when we have our end of the semester, or rather end of the academic year, award recognitions for the students who've gotten the semifinalist role or the finalist role, etc., or been recipients, we also recognize one or two faculty members that have been very integral to the process. We also include them in the press releases, etc. But all that to say, faculty members are crucial. They're so crucial. I mean, because they've really, as I said before, they're kind of like that first line of contact. They know those students beyond their GPA. And when they are, we get the GPA and that kind of like statistical information from the registrar's office. But in terms of like really knowing the student and what they're going for, particularly I think with some of our most competitive merit awards, that has been very, very helpful to get their recommendations and to have them on our side through the application process.
I love those inventive ideas. Oh, sorry, Michelle. I was just going to say, I love the idea that you said about having banners, so all the students want to do that, or those different awards. I think that is a very inventive way to get that type of buy-in. Michelle, were you going to read for Alsace then?
I was, because she's got some, no, she's got some bangers just like Theon did. She says, I am learning about more ways to manage large workloads in the advising space. One thing I do is set priorities in advising for the year. I believe Theon just spoke on this. I also try to partner with campus units who may have lots of candidates. TRIO, SSS, and the Ronald E. McNair Scholars Program are examples, and partner in established sessions and programming. That's right, because you don't want to add more. You want to work with what's already there. This can be expanded to build in application preparation, how to write a personal statement as an example. I partner with faculty by trying to identify those who are tenured and have more flexibility in time. This can be especially important for faculty who are underrepresented in academia. So like the tenure, right? I also try to learn about their priorities and find the overlap in support. And I'm speaking for advising and in regard to the needs of applicants. Because, right, you certainly don't want to duplicate work that is already being done. I look for faculty who have been abroad, have been on national selection committees, or are interested and or able to support undergraduate research and scholarly activities. And then as Alsace says that, as Michelle and Theon said, recognition of faculty can be easy, and I think they really appreciate being recognized for work that they would likely do anyway. That's absolutely correct. Yeah, I mean, our faculty really are a resource, and yes, their experience, that is true. You bring in those who have experience on these committees, and again, I mean, the agencies want you to win, and they want people to share the knowledge and the insight that they have for the benefit of our students. Yeah. Okay.
No, thank you. I'm really enjoying the depth of this conversation. I think we've been able to really dig into some really comprehensive and detailed examples that faculty and higher education staff can take back to the universities. I will just put another plug. If there is a question that we have not answered or have not touched on this chat, please feel free to put it in the chat or use the Q&A function. We are here to answer your questions, whether they be specific or overarching. So while we're waiting for new questions to come in, that actually brings up my next question. So we talked a little bit about, those overarching needs to partner with faculty. But on the other end of it, if you have good faculty partnerships, what are some other things people can look at for program specific to assist their students? So is there a resource guide that you have for, students that you found to be really helpful that you hand out? Or what other ends on the back end, to use Michelle's statement, to help them see behind the curtain? What kind of tools do you have in your toolbox, or kind of tools do you want to put in your toolbox?
So I can start with that. I think it's really priceless, and I think maybe I mentioned this several times, to have our students see themselves, right, aesthetically on either or press releases, or on the banners, or on external press releases, or on Twitter, receiving these awards. Because without saying a word to them, you're communicating to the other students that this is for me. I can do this. Like, there's no question. I mean, there's just this internal process that occurs that no words can really replicate. So that's certainly a big thing. I think also working with alumni, as I mentioned before, is also very priceless, because they have this wealth of information that they are able to give to students who are starting off, and they were in their shoe before. So they know how that, kind of nervousness feels about, is it even worth the time? Am I even going to get this? This is probably not going to happen for me, for a new applicant or prospective applicant to hear from alumni, oh no, I had those same feelings, and I went forth and I tried to conquer, and it worked this way for me. Also, I think, is one of those priceless tools that you want to tap into. One thing that we very much utilize in terms of software is Blackboard for our institution. And so, we do get, what's the word? Assent, essentially, from our prior alumni to provide some details in terms of their application and the application that they did, so that they share with future students what those applications look like. And I think sometimes seeing that in writing helps them to get a mental perspective of what this looks like, and also helps them to realize, well, this isn't as daunting as I think. Right now that I have a sample, now that I have a network that I can access in terms of the alumni, and I have the office, well, I have enough support that this really isn't. I feel confident enough that I can venture forth. Is what I realize with a lot of our students. We also tend to focus a lot on workshops during the summer, and of course, I'm sure with all of you having internal deadlines, so that we procedurally are able to have several times when we're checking in with the students before that national application comes up. So I hope that answers your question, Kat. But all of those procedural steps, I think, are priceless, and it helps to give the students a sense of timeline and focus. I think, because they have on their calendar from like months out exactly what the expectations are of them if they're really going to be working with us to do this. And I think that just works very, very well for them in order to both plan out their time and to give themselves enough time to create a strong draft and a strong application at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think Alsace brought up the National Association of Fellowship Advisors earlier. And so I've been in this job, I might be going into my 4th year, maybe 3rd. And that was just a wonderful place to begin my resource building, because they had wonderful forms that they used, right? And they were willing to share. I mean, just over the past 2 weeks, there's been this beautiful thread. A woman was presenting, and she said she was told that the board expects people to kind of begin with a joke. And so she said, look, are there any fellowship jokes? And people literally just started sharing the 5 piles of jokes that they put together. So, like how forms that they use, the questions that they use, and in orienting their students to fellowships. What are the sort of, foundational questions that you ask for building your database? I mean, for new advisors, which is generally how their sessions are broken up for, veterans and for novices. So that was helpful. So to that end, I wound up creating one of my own, and it's a Dear Recommender form. Because I thought, students sometimes will send you these emails and they'll say, can you write me a recommendation because I took you in my first year, or I feel like you know me best. Well, that doesn't really help you when they don't understand that you've taught hundreds of students over the years or whatever the issue. So the form that I created, is basically, Dear Dr. So-and-so, Professor so-and-so, I am this person. I'm applying for this award. That this award is about, I am qualified to apply because things I say in my personal statement include some of my leadership outcomes involve, right? So it prompts the student to tell the recommender about themselves. And also the sort of one thing that I understood kind of going in was that a good application is coherent. And so all the parts, sort of echo one another. And so it would help if the recommender is recommending the same student that is filling out the application, so that the information is complementary. So I started thinking about, okay, well, ways that I could do that. And students said that when they would share that sort of with other people, the people found that way of writing very helpful. So it basically is just extending what NAFA already does. So Als says, I like to direct applicants to short 1 to 10 minute videos from national scholarship programs that have made broad efforts to reach out to underrepresented applicants. The Fulbright program is an example, especially in the past few years. Their website is phenomenal. And I say to students all the time when they come in for Fulbright, you must first go through their website and watch the webinars. They are so good. And so, yes, the websites are just phenomenal. And then says, utilizing previous applicants, current students and alumni is priceless. When they are comfortable, I encourage applicants who do not progress nationally to participate and to be candid. That's nice, because that also encourages the kind of reflection that I'm not always sure of. So I don't just say to all recipients to come back and talk, because just because you are a finalist, that doesn't always make the student reflective, responsible in their reflection. So this idea of teaching that, right, I think that's what you're doing through that encouragement. I love that. If we are saying the process itself is valuable, that message can be shared powerfully by prospective applicants' peers. These previous applicants can also relate to candidates in a way I cannot as a non-alumna. Lastly, I really appreciate the value of relationships, and I enjoy connecting students with alumni who can be a support in and outside the application process. Very, very true. Yep.
Thank you for that. And I think we have another question from our Q&A. So this is a direct question. So this person says, our university currently doesn't have an international scholarship office for students. Do you have any online resources that I can recommend my students to look to find for programs and get support?
And you see, Alsace dropped one in the chat. Are you going to take that? She dropped two in the chat. Okay.
I will
so
add those links to the event chat so everybody can see them. Thank you for those, Alsace. Theon and Michelle, do you have any other resources that you can help share so individuals can send them out to their students who don't have, institutions who have those kind of supports that you do, or offices or individuals who are in charge of that?
Go ahead, Theon.
Sorry, so I was going to say, it does, just take a few minutes if one has the time to just put together a spreadsheet of some of the most popular merit awards, right? And the eligibility requirements, funding, what they are looking for in students. So it doesn't have to be too in depth, but I think just having that kind of handout, whether posted online, even if your office is not there to necessarily provide this kind of in-depth support, at least the students have a place to go somewhere on your university website where they can just click on this like prestigious merit awards link, and they get a list of the opportunities and then the hyperlink to the opportunities, right? So then once they get that access to that document, they just literally click on each link to see what the requirements are and what they're eligible for and what they're interested in. So I think that's an easy way to kind of like condense everything in one place. If you actually don't have a fellowships office, I think that you just would need to think about where you want to place that on your website. But that would be off the top of my head the advice that would be a bit a more succinct and efficient way of getting the information to the students.
I think it's important for the questioner to also understand that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so there are things that are already out there. And so what you do is you turn to already resourced places, right? So like, I think it's University of Berkeley, they got a great website. And it's sort of all those links are already there. And then like, it's even like searchable based on, criteria. So if you're 18, LGBT, whatever, you could just put in the field and it'll pull up things that are available. So, right, we don't have to make that. They've already made it. So you can use things that are already available. So literally like a quick Google search for international fellowships for college students might pull up places and you go to them. And for me, they became a go-to. So I created a OneNote where I dropped in all the things, because I think there's maybe University of Buffalo has another good office. And so I kept a file. So then when I made my own Moodle site, so that's our LMS, I put those in there as resources, because sometimes I still get calls about, hey, do you know of any? Well, I know of Berkeley, and Berkeley has all these things listed. So says, I urge students to not navigate on their own, talk to their academic advisors about their desire to go abroad. If they cannot reach out to a professor, reach out to financial aid offices, reach out to someone. And that's true. Because like the one CLS, Bourne, Gilman, they work very closely with financial aid. And also, like political science, international studies, history, world languages. Those are also really natural places where you may find faculty who have that experience abroad.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Dion.
The last thing I'll just add is that perhaps keeping in mind that there are some opportunities that do require institutional nomination. So if you're going to have that information sent out to students or available and accessible on your website to students, then having a person that they can come to and having that name or office clear where they can access that institutional nomination, I think is going to be a necessary part of the process.
No, thank you for that. And I was going to ask a follow-up question on that. So you're talking all about how you want students to seek those resources. I know, Michelle, you don't have that one centralized office. So do you have a Q&A sheet for students, or is there a page on their website or anything like that, or any kind of resources you have at your institutions to disperse information to students to know to talk to their advisors, the financial aid office, or other things like that? How do you handle that second part of marketing?
Yeah, the website does list It gives like all the people who are associated with these awards, our names are listed there. And so, right, I mean, that's a good point, that the resource is connected to a person so that you can, as Alsace was saying, you can build relationships with the faculty, with the staff, with people who are in position to help guide you if you do have questions. So, and then Alsace says that the NAFA advisors, so there are a couple of resources that she adds that, Kat, you might want to put it in the chat, that are linked to NAFA. I can't say enough what a wonderful organization that is.
No, it sounds like they're a fantastic resource. Thank you for that. Speaking of resources, I think I've heard a common thread of financial aid and financing is a common, prohibitive cost or perceived prohibition for a lot of students to look at international abroad or study abroad programs. Do you have any specific other resources besides those ones given, or anything like that for faculty to consider creating for students related to financial aid and other, programs, whether it's for Fulbright or others, specifically related to cost?
I'm sorry, Kat. So for a moment there, you kind of went in and out. So we weren't able, at least I was not able to hear the full question. Do you mind repeating?
No, thank you. Good to know. I was just asking about financial aid resources or other, resources specifically to the cost of international abroad. If you knew of any guides for that or any places faculty can look or things to create related to that, since it's a common theme that seems like holds back a lot of students for applying or considering programs.
Alsace says in the chat, I spread the word on social media, email, flyers, search engine optimization on websites. I also list my name and appointment links in email and online. I try to present to student groups and ask them better ways to reach out. I also think, too, in addition to those things, that it is helpful to recognize that there's almost a genre of writing that's linked to fellowship recipients who write about their experience. And those people are also wonderful resources. So, right, like, the other Wes Moore, right? Like he was, what was it, Rhodes? He won the Rhodes. And so, like there are people who, John Edgar Weideman, he's a Rhodes. And so there are people who write books about their experience with these fellowships. And that is a way to gain insight about the award. But also what happened during COVID is people created a web presence around the awards, and many of these Marshall, they did a wonderful job because we couldn't do the study travel, so that people who advise could learn about how the educational system works in the UK. They created a channel. So you can actually use that resource to learn about how that system works. So, it takes a little bit more, it takes a lot more effort to do it that way, but that's another way of learning and then reaching out to the ambassadors, like for Fulbright, like there are Fulbright ambassadors who will respond with your questions about how they manage. And I can't tell you the sheer number of students of mine who wanted to do Fulbright in particular because of a vlog. So like these student vlogs have been so impressive, and those people respond with detailed information. So like asking those questions, how did you fund this? Can you talk about that? Can you do something more about it? I've learned from students the things that they've learned through that process.
I agree. And I also will add that two things. One, what I have found out in my experience is that it's been priceless being a reviewer for some of these award opportunities, right? Because you get this kind of in-depth understanding of what reviewers are looking for, particularly for undergraduate study abroad opportunities, right? So funding opportunities for undergraduate study abroad, specifically I'm thinking about the Gilman and the CLS scholarship. And so what I find that I try to do throughout the year is to have information sessions specifically on those award opportunities that are there to offer funding for undergraduate study abroad. Keeping in mind that our office also has a study abroad office, so we tend to just deal with the ones that are State Department funded, that kind of funding. But I think having an information session that's specifically, like the title is specifically like, how do you fund your study abroad opportunity, right? Is really important, and spreading that as much as possible on social media and making sure that you have an in-depth understanding of the award opportunities and what they're looking for in terms of a strong candidate. And I feel that serving as a reviewer for some of these awards help with that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll say gave us a couple links too. General information about funding going abroad may include a link like from the Gilman Scholarship, because the sources do explain in depth, and it's important to stress to the candidate the importance of reading the information that's on those websites, watching their webinars, because the kind of people who are funded are people who would do that. That's what responsible people do. So a part of your engagement with these sources, it does confirm your readiness, right, to be a recipient. So I think it's important that advisors understand that you may want to stress that the student is responsible for doing some of this work by clicking on this link, reading, watching, listening, and then asking questions. So their due diligence is an important part of the being funded. And then also Alsace provides the Fulbright link for the alumni ambassadors. And again, they are wonderful. She says, I have conversations about cost when I present to students and to faculty. I make it part of the presentation and talk. I also am specific about wording when I advertise sessions, get fully funded, get paid to go abroad as examples. And that's the way our QEP looked. You know, it would say, did you know that you could use your financial aid? You know, did you know that there are fellowships that will support you studying abroad? I reach out to students who have financial need and share this overt messaging about funding being available.
No, thank you. And I think that brings up a notion that I've heard in higher education and academic advising that I think you talked a little about, Michelle, is having students take ownership and take responsibility for some of the things they're doing, which is great. But I've also heard from colleagues before that if students want to do it, they'll do it, and you shouldn't have to do any marketing. So if you've ever encountered faculty who say specific and targeted outreach isn't necessary, could you share how you feel about that and how you deal with that at an institution level for those who think that, you know, any kind of information programming isn't necessary?
I've never actually dealt with that. I mean, mostly, so it looks like Alsace is talking, so I'll ventriloquize because, I mean, anyone that I work with, when you work with students, that's the work. I mean, like, that's amazing to me that anyone would actually think that after working with real students. Again, like, because a part of the work is getting them to understand that the work of the student is to ask questions, and to not move in the world like they have all the answers. That is not how you grow, right? You know something, but you can't make a single citation. I mean, that is not how the academy works. And so, yeah, I don't know that doesn't even sound like you understand what it's like to work with students. I mean, the work is about informing. And then also helping them to recognize that you are available to them to discuss their questions and their queries. And so, I mean, if one way to think about the marketing then is that it's an invitation for a conversation. And students who have felt like or feel that they don't belong, the extra step of making an invitation is to helping to dispel that, right? I mean, it's a way of extending welcome and sharing, and sort of letting them know that this here is for you too, right? That this opportunity isn't closed off. And so people who already are overwhelmed by all these resources, they may not feel that they are welcome to it. And so that's why I think it's important to do it.
Absolutely. And I think it's also for those who say that it might be a bit of misunderstanding, right, about levels of privilege, right? And when students are really being exposed to knowledge about study abroad opportunities and merit award opportunities, right? Not all students are going to be exposed in high school or even as a freshman about these opportunities. And so I think it's important to realize and acknowledge that not all students are the same. Access to knowledge is different. And so it is, of course, one's responsibility, and that's why we have this office, to kind of even the playing field.
Yeah, I think Alsace echoes that, Theon, when she says that unless you reach out, to inform people of what they don't know, then you could be at fault for perpetuating disparities, because you aren't doing anything with what you know to correct for them by sharing that opportunity and insight. So, yeah. Yeah, I read recently with NAFA's recommendation, The Privileged Poor, and it was interesting. That was really an interesting look at, like students, the privileged poor would be those who experienced an elite private school education prior to coming to college. And they're poor, but they understand how the system works. And so they understand like what office hours are and how beneficial they can be. And so they understand the importance of networking and their relationship to that, the expectation that they meet with professors. Students who, for example, weren't the privileged poor, but they make it to an elite school. They didn't know, for example, that office hours were for them. They thought that office hours meant that that's when the professor is in their office doing their work and we're not to be disturbed, right? So this idea that you're a part of correcting for what students don't know and how that can aid in doing social justice work is important insight. Right? I mean, not everyone has the benefit of knowing how this works. So a part of what is important, and I found among the privileged poor, the so-called elite, there is work that still needs to be done with all students on how to participate in an environment that is designed around intellectual seriousness and seriousness of intellectual purpose. And so, I think that this fellowship world helps to students in that way, teaching them about the norms and expectations too.
No, thank you very much for that, robust. And I agree with all of the things you say. I have one quick personal adage to put in. I've done K-12 education and higher education. And one day I was in a preschool classroom and I read a book on astronauts. And I visited the next week and everybody told me that they were going to be an astronaut when they grew up. And that's just an extrapolating, you can't be what you can't see little metaphor that I think exists in higher education, and the same with these programs that we promote. So I wanted to share that cute little personal story that everybody was wearing like milk cartons on their head and pieces of paper, and they made little flight patches. But in a bigger story, that's exactly how things work in the real world, even with adults. So thank you
It's
all.
insightful.
Yeah, I wanted to give everybody one last moment to touch upon any questions I haven't asked you. If you have any insights or personal adages to share as we wrap up this panel that we didn't get an opportunity to talk through before, despite the fact that we had such an insightful and really great conversation today.
I would just add, and I again, like I've said this before, just realizing what resources are out there to help you to do your job as best as possible in terms of reaching the students and helping them to realize that this is for them also, right? Let's overcome this notion of what privilege is supposed to be in a way, and realize that you're quite capable of getting there. And those are, you know, making sure that faculty members in as much as possible are involved in the process, using social media and ways that they actually communicate, handshake. I don't know what it is for your institutions, but, you know, kind of almost like flooding those spheres with these programs, with these materials. I love. I can't remember who said it, but just in terms of lingo and language, and even when you're thinking about Twitter, I love the language. Fully funded, right? You can get fully funded for this to study abroad, and just being very, very strategic about wording when you have those small characters, and when we're dealing with the generation that we're dealing with, so that it catches their eye. And then, of course, having the contact information that they know, okay, this is the office that I go to when I see this information posted, because a part of me wants to do this. And once you tell me it's fully funded and you're showing me some press releases of students from my school who have already done this, and I can talk to my faculty member, and I remember that being mentioned, and I had that information session that I attended, or, you know, that somebody came to my classroom and spoke to me about, like, you know, you're kind of like building and building and building, and you're making it easier for them to see themselves in that position and in that place, maybe Greece or Ireland or whatever, or Sudan. You know, I think that's very important.
I just want to join with Alce. She included her email address. I've included mine. I also join her in thanking those attending this session, she writes, because to me, that means that they are interested in reaching out to a broad swath of eligible candidates, and better reaching underrepresented eligible candidates. I encourage realistic expectations for yourself as you do what you can. What can be very intensive work. So, right, I join her in those sentiments, and looks like all three of us have included our contact information. So thank you so much, Kat, for a very engaging conversation and session.
No, thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom with everybody here who's with us live or who will be watching these videos later. I've also put my contact information in. And if you're with us live, I'd like to encourage you to follow up with We Represent. There is a networking opportunity later on today. I would say this afternoon, but I'm not sure what all attendees' time zone is. And also for our attendees of this conference to look forward to a survey that will be sent later, I believe on Monday, following up to make sure that we're answering all eligible questions and to continue contact and the great work of We Present. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. This will conclude our session for today.